In the 13th century, the world was full of powerful, fortified empires. The Song dynasty in China, the Khwarezmian Empire in Persia, the Kievan Rus, these were ancient civilizations, defended by huge armies and walls that looked impenetrable. And yet, one by one, they all fell to an enemy they couldn't possibly understand. An enemy that came roaring out of the vast, empty steppes of Mongolia. How did they do it? How did a scattered collection of nomadic tribes, who were almost always outnumbered, manage to build the largest connected land empire in all of human history? It wasn't just about having better swords or bows. The powerful armies of the time simply had no idea what was about to hit them. The answer is a deadly combination of three things that worked in terrifying, perfect harmony: blinding speed, brilliant tactics, and a mastery of psychological warfare that could break an army's spirit before the first arrow was even fired. This is the story of how the synergy of speed, tactics, and terror made the Mongol armies a force unlike any the world had ever seen. The architect of the empire, the rise of Genghis Khan. Before you can understand the Mongol war machine, you have to understand the man who built it. Temujin, the boy who had become Genghis Khan, his life wasn't easy. It was forged in the brutal world of the Mongolian steppe, a place of constant betrayal, tribal warfare, and pure survival. Born into a small clan, his father was poisoned, and his family was abandoned, forcing him to spend his youth as a hunted outcast. He was enslaved, humiliated, and had to fight for every scrap of power. But these hardships didn't break him. They made him smarter. They taught him that the old ways of tribal loyalty, based on family ties and shifting alliances, were a recipe for chaos. He imagined something new. As he started uniting the broken tribes, he didn't appeal to tradition. He shattered it. He built his new world on two radical ideas: absolute discipline and pure meritocracy. In the Mongol army, your family name meant nothing. Your wealth meant nothing. All that mattered was your skill, your loyalty, and your obedience. Commanders who failed were replaced, while those who proved themselves even former enemies were promoted. This created a command structure of total loyalty and proven skill, from the smallest 10-man squad, the Arban, all the way up to the 10,000-man division, the Tumen. Genghis Khan created a strict legal code, the Yasa, which outlawed feuding, theft, and the kidnapping of women, punishing any violation with death. This transformed the scattered nomads into a single, disciplined nation, built for one purpose: war. He knew that true strength wasn't about numbers, but about unity. He didn't just build an army. He engineered a society that was an army. Every man was a soldier, trained from birth to ride a horse and shoot a bow with lethal skill. This foundation, built on hardship and genius, created the ruthless force he would soon unleash on the world. The engine of conquest, unbelievable speed and logistics. The first pillar of Mongol dominance, the engine that drove their conquests, was speed. A kind of speed so foreign to their enemies, it felt almost supernatural. While the great armies of Europe and Asia were trudging across the landscape with their slow-moving infantry and heavy supply wagons, the Mongol army moved like the wind. How did they do it? The secret was the heart of Mongol culture: the horse, specifically the tough, resilient Mongol pony. This wasn't some fancy show horse. It was a rugged survivor that could handle extreme weather and live on whatever grass it could find, even if it had to paw through snow. But the real genius wasn't just the horse, but how the Mongols used them. Every Mongol warrior brought a string of 3, 4, or even 5 horses with him. This was a logistical game changer. A soldier would ride one horse until it was tired, then just jump onto a fresh one, letting the other run free with the herd to recover. This system let Mongol armies travel for days without stopping, covering distances their enemies thought were impossible. In one famous case, a Mongol force covered 130 miles in just 2 days in harsh weather, to launch a surprise attack. They moved faster than rumors. An enemy king might hear about a Mongol army hundreds of miles away, only to find their scouts at his gates the next day. This mobility was backed by their nomadic ability to live off the land. A Mongol soldier carried everything he needed with him: dried meat, fermented mare's milk, called ereg, and tools to repair his own gear. The herds of horses were a moving pantry, providing milk and, if things got desperate, blood or meat. This freed them from needing slow supply lines. While their enemies were chained to their baggage trains, the Mongols were a self-sufficient river of warriors that could cross any terrain: deserts, mountains, frozen rivers, and attack from any direction. This strategic mobility was a weapon in itself. It meant their enemies never got to choose where or when to fight. The Mongols dictated every single engagement. They could appear from nowhere, concentrate their forces to hit a weak spot, and then vanish before a larger army could even respond. This incredible speed didn't just win battles. It created chaos and paralysis. It was the foundation for everything else they did. The art of deception. Tactical genius. If speed was the engine of the Mongol war machine, then their tactical genius was its razor-sharp blade. The Mongols didn't fight like anyone else. They saw the battlefield as a chessboard where psychology and deception were more powerful than brute force. They consistently beat much larger armies because they simply refused to fight on their enemies' terms. Their favorite trick, and the one that became their signature, was the feigned retreat. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, designed to turn an army's strengths, like its numbers and heavy armor, into fatal weaknesses. Here's how it worked. A Mongol force, looking small and outnumbered, would attack a much larger European or Persian army. They'd shower the enemy with arrows from their powerful composite bows, picking them off from a distance. Then, right when the enemy committed to a full-on charge, the Mongols would suddenly break and run, pretending to be in a full-blown panic. To a confident, disciplined army, a fleeing enemy is an irresistible target. Thinking victory was theirs, they'd break formation and give chase. The chase would go on for miles, stretching the enemy line thin, leaving them disorganized and exhausted. Then, at a pre-planned spot, the trap would spring. The fleeing Mongols would suddenly turn around as fresh Mongol forces, hidden in a crescent formation, would sweep in from the sides and rear. The hunters were now the hunted. What started as a triumphant pursuit became a slaughterhouse. Surrounded, exhausted, and in total disarray, the enemy army would be annihilated by volleys of arrows from all directions. This one tactic won some of their most famous victories. But they were also masters of battlefield illusion. A Mongol commander might order each soldier to light 5 campfires at night instead of 1, making their army look 5 times bigger and demoralizing the enemy before the fight even started. They'd tie branches to their horses' tails to kick up huge dust clouds, simulating the arrival of massive reinforcements and causing widespread panic. They even used whistling arrows that shrieked through the air, not just to kill, but to create pure terror and spook the enemy's horses. Perhaps the greatest sign of their genius was how they learned and adapted. The stereotype of a steppe warrior is that they're useless against a stone wall. And at first, the Mongols were terrible at sieges, but they were fast learners. When they conquered a city in China or Persia, they'd round up all the engineers and siege experts. These captives were spared and forced to build siege engines for their new masters. Soon, Mongol armies traveled with their own corps of engineers who could build massive trebuchets, catapults, and battering rams on site. They learned to use gunpowder weapons from the Chinese. They used ruthless tactics like diverting rivers to flood a city or marching captured civilians in front of them as human shields. While they weren't always successful, a few heavily fortified cities and castles did manage to hold out. They turned their greatest weakness into one of their most terrifying strengths. For most, a walled city was no longer a fortress. It was a death trap, the ultimate weapon. Calculated terror speed gave them reach. Tactics gave them victory on the battlefield. But the third pillar, the one that made them seem truly unstoppable, was terror. For the Mongols, terror wasn't just a byproduct of war. It was a weapon. It was a calculated, systematic strategy designed to crush an enemy's will to resist, winning wars before they even began. The Mongol offer to a new city was brutally simple. They could surrender to Mongol rule without a fight, pay the tribute, and be absorbed into the empire. If they did, their lives, property, and even local leaders were often left alone. Submission meant survival. The alternative was to resist. And resistance meant total annihilation. This was not a bluff. If a city fought back and was taken by force, the Mongols would often execute the entire population. Accounts from Persia, Russia, and China describe cities where every man, woman, and child was killed. They would then build gruesome pyramids out of skulls outside the city's ruins as a billboard-sized warning to anyone else who was thinking of defiance. But here's the most brilliant and terrifying part of this strategy. They would often let a few people escape. This wasn't mercy. Those survivors had a job to do. Their job was to flee to the next city and tell everyone about the unspeakable horror they had just witnessed. They would arrive, traumatized and panicked, describing the slaughter and the pyramids of heads. This was psychological warfare on a continental scale. The Mongols carefully built their reputation for ferocity because they knew fear traveled faster than their horses. Fear could break alliances and cause entire armies to lose their nerve. As the Mongol conquest spread, city after city heard the nightmare stories from refugees and simply surrendered. Their soldiers were demoralized, and their leaders, facing a choice between submission and obliteration, often just opened the gates. Terror wasn't mindless savagery. It was a strategy. It was the advance guard of the Mongol army, a plague of fear that did the fighting for them. So you have this incredible combination of lightning-fast horsemen, brilliant deceptive tactics, and pure weaponized terror. Each one was deadly, but together they were something else. Which one do you think was the real game changer? Let me know what you think in the comments below. The unstoppable synergy. So, what really made the Mongol Empire nearly unstoppable? It wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just the speed, or the tactics, or the terror. It was the incredible synergy between them, how these three pillars fused together into a seamless system of conquest. Each element made the others even more powerful. Think about it. Their incredible speed is what made their brilliant tactics possible. The feigned retreat only works if you can outrun your enemy, something only an all-cavalry army with spare horses could pull off. A slow, heavy army could never react in time to the Mongols' lightning-fast encirclements. By the time they figured out what was happening, the trap had already snapped shut. Now, add terror to that speed. The Mongol army moved so fast that the horrifying stories of their massacres would arrive just a little before the army itself. This created immediate panic. There was no time to build alliances or prepare defenses. The choice between surrender and death had to be made in days, not months. Finally, fuse their tactics with their terror. Imagine you're a soldier waiting to fight the Mongols. You've already heard the stories about what they do to cities that resist. Your nerves are shot. Then, on the battlefield, you face an army that shrieks and uses strange illusions to make you think you're outnumbered. An army already weakened by fear was far more likely to break and run when faced with the Mongols' disorienting tactics. The fear they built off the battlefield made their tactics on the battlefield 100 times more effective. This was the perfect, vicious cycle. Terror won them bloodless victories, which preserved their own soldiers. Speed allowed them to pick off their enemies one by one before they could unite, and their tactics ensured that when they did fight, they won, which only fueled their terrifying reputation. They weren't just fighting a war on the ground. They were fighting a war inside their enemies' minds. And that was a war they almost never lost. The Mongol Empire was more than just a military force. It was the product of a military genius. Under Genghis Khan, the Mongols didn't just perfect nomadic warfare. They transformed it into a system for taking down entire civilizations. They blended the mobility of the steppe with the discipline of a professional army and the cunning of a master strategist. They understood that you could topple empires not just by breaking their armies, but by breaking their spirit. They waged total war, where the psychological front was just as important as the physical one. And they were a learning machine, constantly absorbing the technologies and talents of the people they conquered to get even stronger. They didn't just conquer the world. They rewrote the rules of war, leaving a legacy of innovation and terror that would echo for centuries. For a brief time, they were the closest the world has ever seen to a truly unstoppable force. If you found this look into one of history's most feared armies fascinating, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching.